Lord Julian knew enough of women to be left in no further doubt. He bowed his head so that she might not see the anger in his eyes, for as a man of honour he took shame in that anger which, as a human being, he could not repress. And because nature in him was stronger, as it is in most of us, than training, Lord Julian from that moment began, almost in spite of himself, to practice something that was akin to villainy. I regret to chronicle it of one for whom, if I have done him any sort of justice, you should have been conceiving some esteem. But the truth is that the lingering remains of the regard in which he had held Peter Blood were choked by the desire to supplant and destroy a rival. He had passed his word to Arabella that he would use his powerful influence on Blood's behalf. I deplore to set it down that not only did he forget his pledge, but secretly set himself to aid and abet Arabella's uncle in the plans he had laid for the trapping and undoing of the buccaneer. He might reasonably have urged, had he been taxed with it, that he conducted himself precisely as his duty demanded. But to that he might have been answered that duty with him was but the slave of jealousy in this. When the Jamaican fleet put to sea some few days later, Lord Julian sailed with Colonel Bishop in Vice Admiral Cartford's flagship. Not only was there no need for either of them to go, but the Deputy Governor's duties actually demanded that he should remain ashore, whilst Lord Julian, as we know, was a useless man aboard a ship. Yet both set out to hunt Captain Blood, each making of his duty a pretext for the satisfaction of personal aims, and that common purpose became a link between them, binding them in a sort of friendship that must otherwise have been impossible between men so dissimilar in breeding and in aspirations. The hunt was up. They cruised a while off Hispaniola, watching the windward passage and suffering the discomforts of the rainy season which had now set in. But they cruised in vain, and after a month of it returned empty-handed to Port Royal, there to find awaiting them the most disquieting news from the old world. The megalomania of Louis XIV had set Europe in a blaze of war. The French legionaries were ravaging the Rhine provinces, and Spain had joined the nations leagued to defend themselves from the wild ambitions of the King of France. And there was worse than this. There were rumours of a civil war in England, where the people had grown weary of the bigoted tyranny of King James. It was reported that William of Orange had been invited to come over. Weeks passed, and every ship from home brought additional news. William had crossed to England, and in March of that year, 1689, they learnt in Jamaica that he had accepted the crown, and that James had thrown himself into the arms of France for rehabilitation. To a kinsman of Sunderland's, this was disquieting news. Indeed, it was followed by letters from King William's Secretary of State informing Colonel Bishop that there was war with France, and that in view of its effect upon the colonies, a Governor-General was coming out to the West Indies in the person of Lord Willoughby, and that with him came a squadron under the command of Admiral Van der Kuylen to reinforce the Jamaican fleet against eventualities. Bishop realized that this must mean the end of his supreme authority, even though he should continue in Port Royal as Deputy Governor. Lord Julian, in the lack of direct news to himself, did not know what it might mean to him, but he had been very close and confidential with Colonel Bishop regarding his hopes of Arabella, and Colonel Bishop, more than ever, now that political events had put him in danger of being retired, was anxious to enjoy the advantages of having a man of Lord Julian's eminence for his relative. They came to a complete understanding in the matter, and Lord Julian disclosed all that he knew. "There is one obstacle in our path," said he. "Captain Blood. The girl is in love with him." "You're surely mad," cried Bishop, when he had recovered speech. "You are justified of the assumption," said his lordship dolefully, "but I happen to be sane, and to speak with knowledge." "With knowledge?" "Arabella herself has confessed it to me." "The brazen baggage! By God, I'll bring her to her senses!" It was the slave-driver speaking, the man who governed with a whip. "Don't be a fool, Bishop." His lordship's contempt did more than any argument to calm the colonel. That's not the way with a girl of Arabella's spirit. Unless you want to wreck my chances for all time, you'll hold your tongue and not interfere at all. Not interfere? My God, what then? Listen, man, she has a constant mind. I don't think you know your niece. As long as Blood lives, she will wait for him. Then with Blood dead, perhaps she will come to her silly senses. Now you begin to show intelligence, Lord Julian commended him. That is the first essential step. And here is our chance to take it. Bishop warmed to a sort of enthusiasm. This war with France removes all restrictions in the matter of Tortuga. We are free to invest it in the services of the crown. A victory there, and we establish ourselves in the favor of this new government. Ah, said Lord Julian, and he pulled thoughtfully at his lip. I see that you understand. Bishop laughed coarsely. 2 birds with 1 stone, eh? We'll hunt this rascal in his lair, right under the beard of the King of France, and we'll take him this time, if we reduce Torga to a heap of ashes. On that expedition they sailed 2 days later, which would be some 3 months after Blood's departure, taking every ship of the fleet and several lesser vessels as auxiliaries. To Arabella and the world in general, it was given out that they were going to raid French Hispaniola, which was really the only expedition that could have afforded Colonel Bishop any sort of justification for leaving Jamaica at all at such a time. His sense of duty, indeed, should have kept him fast in Port Royal, but his sense of duty was smothered in hatred, that most fruitless and corruptive of all emotions. In the great cabin of Vice Admiral Crawford's flagship, the Imperator, the Deputy Governor, got drunk that night to celebrate his conviction that the sands of Captain Blood's career were running out. End of chapter.